I'm going to share with you my opinions on the new 7Artisans 24mm f1.8 lens, which 7Artisans kindly sent me for free to make this video. So first of all, in terms of price, this lens goes for $330, which as far as I've researched, it's the cheapest 24mm f1.8 autofocus lens from China. You have one option from Samyang, which goes for $400, and then you also have one from Viltrox, which goes for $380. So if you want to save as much money as possible on your new 24mm f1.8 autofocus lens, this is definitely a great option to consider. Now in terms of focal length, this is a 24mm lens, which is going to be great for like landscape shots, vlogging, talking head YouTube shots, environmental portraits, and even in some cases product shots. I think this focal length is very versatile because it can work for so many things, except I would say portraits, because then it can make faces look a bit distorted. But if you're looking for like an everyday lens that can deliver a wide angle field of view, this is definitely a great option to consider. Now in terms of design, this is how the lens looks like. As you can see, it is a bit bulky, weighs about 430 grams, but the build quality at least is fantastic. It's made entirely pretty much out of metal. Everything feels very robust and solid when holding it in the hands. It has a 62mm filter thread in front, a very nice and smooth focus ring, which doesn't make any noises when rotating it, a pretty smooth declicked aperture ring, which cannot be clicked with a button. And when you go from the minimum aperture of f16 to A, there is a bit of resistance to it. This is going to be very helpful when you're going to store this lens in your bag, because it's not going to by accident go from f16 to A. In terms of like buttons and switches, you have an autofocus manual focus switch, a very clicky button. Then here on the back, you have a metal lens mount, no rubber gasket for weather sealing. This lens is not weather sealed. And finally, you also have a USB-C port in here to update the firmware. Now, speaking about the firmware, the first day I got this lens, I tested it with my Sony ZV-E1 with active stabilization enabled, and then I noticed a bit of like jerkiness, like wobbliness in the stabilization performance, and I was wondering why it happens. So then I went to the settings, to the steady shot settings, and I switched it from automatic to 24mm, and then pretty much all the stabilization jerkiness disappeared. I sent these clips that I shot and tested to 7Artisans. They also noticed the issue, and they say they are going to fix this issue in a future firmware update. So basically, if you want to get the best stabilization performance, at least for video with this lens, I would highly recommend setting the steady shot settings manually to 24mm, because that's going to work much better than using automatic steady shot settings. Now, in terms of focus, first of all, the minimum focus distance of this lens is 0.32 meters, which is honestly a bit far for a wide angle lens like this. And personally, I prefer having a closer minimum focus distance when shooting with a wide angle lens, because then you can get closer to the subject, have the background blurry, and also reveal a lot of the background at the same time, which gives you a very unique perspective. So in this case, this lens is a bit limiting, but at least when you shoot at the minimum focus distance with this lens, the image is sharp pretty much across the entire frame. Now, in terms of focus breathing, I think this lens performs really well. I couldn't notice any focus breathing issues at all with this lens. So if you like doing focus stacking or pulling shots, this is definitely a great option to consider. And in terms of overall autofocus performance, I think it performs really well if you shoot in good lit conditions. But if you shoot in like backlight conditions, if you backlight your subject, it can hunt occasionally. I noticed that sometimes it would hunt when I would backlight my subject, but I would say this is pretty much the case for all Chinese lenses, and even in some cases, first-party Sony lenses will hunt when you're going to shoot in a very contrasty scene where you have, you know, the light directly at the lens and the subject is going to be a little bit dark. So overall, I think the autofocus performance is great. It's just that in darker environments, it's not, you know, the best like a native Sony lens. All right, now in terms of image quality, I think this lens performs really well for just $330. It's going to be very sharp in the center when shooting wide open at f1.8. f1.8 with slight soft corners and some visible vignetting that's not too distracting in my personal opinion. But once you stop down to about f2.2, the image becomes significantly sharper across the entire frame with barely any visible vignetting. And of course, once you stop down to about f2.8 or f4, the image becomes pretty much tack sharp across the entire frame with barely any visible vignetting at all. Also, in terms of bokeh, I think this lens produces nice looking bokeh. Obviously, it's not going to blow your mind by any means, but I think for just $330, it looks fantastic. Also, if you're going to backlight your subject, this lens is going to maintain contrast pretty well without introducing significant amount of lens flares, so like hazing, ghosting and stuff like that. And I didn't really notice any chromatic aberration issues with this lens when shooting wide open in high contrast scenes, which is great because sometimes with these Chinese lenses, when you shoot wide open in high contrast scenes, you will see a lot of chromatic aberration issues, but this is not the case with this lens. However, one thing that I did notice with this lens is that it produces like a warm tint to the image, which is something that I'm not really a big fan of. I prefer having like a neutral color to my image from my lenses, because then it's a bit easier to white balance and color grade. So that's definitely something to consider, but honestly, it's not really a big deal, especially with like 10-bit Sony cameras, which you can like readjust the colors in post-production if necessary. All right, so to summarize, I think honestly this lens is a fantastic choice, especially for just $330. Yes, it is not perfect. It's a bit bulky for an f1.8 aperture lens, but at least the build quality is fantastic. It has the stabilization issues that I've mentioned, but 7Artisans did say that they're going to fix this in a future firmware update. The minimum focus distance is a bit far, which is a bit disappointing to be honest. Then the autofocus doesn't perform the best when shooting in high contrast scenes or when backlighting your subject. And finally, I'm not really the biggest fan of the warm color cast this lens has, but honestly, for $330, I can't really complain that much, because for this price, I think this lens is probably the best option on the market, considering the price point. If you know anything better than this, that has an f1.8 aperture and autofocus at this price point, please share with us down below. Anyhow guys, thanks for watching, and I guess I'll see you again soon. Bye bye.